relationship. I think at that point, things were coming down on us pretty hard, and we started to take care of each other a lot more.
Yeah. We did 72 of those shows.
CBS had strict rules about editing the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Every second was reviewed. Every word was checked. But on September 17, 1967, something slipped through. The censors missed it. The director didn't catch it. Even the brothers didn't know until later. During The Who's performance, the camera accidentally captured something in the background, something that proved what everyone suspected, but couldn't prove. The Smothers Brothers' story began with tragedy. Their father, Major Thomas B. Smothers, Jr., was an Army officer. In 1941, during World War II, he was serving in the Philippines. When Japan invaded, his wife Ruth and their sons were sent away. Major Smothers was captured. He survived the terrible Bataan Death March. Later, he was sent to Fukuoka, number 22, a harsh prison camp in Japan. In April 1945, when the war was almost over, he was too sick to work. On April 25th, he was moved from Fukuoka to Korea. He never made it. Some reports say he was buried at sea. Others say he was cremated in Korea. Of the 110 men who were transferred with him, only 36 survived. Major Smothers was the last to die. Ruth was left alone to raise Tom, who was born in 1937, and Dick, born in 1938. They grew up in California, while their mother worked long hours. Life was hard, and that pain shaped their comedy for years to come. That comedy first took off in 1959 at the Purple Onion, a small club in San Francisco. The brothers were booked for just 2 weeks, but they were such a hit that they stayed for 36 weeks. Audiences loved their odd mix of folk music and funny stories. One night, a flamenco dancer was injured. Tom and Dick had to take her place. That surprise appearance showed everyone how special they were. By the end of their run, they were earning $2,000 a week. Only a few months before, they had been making $2 a night. Their first record, The Smothers Brothers at the Purple Onion, was released in 1961. It launched their career. Long before the Purple Onion, they played in a group Tom started at college. It was called the Casual Quintet. Tom played guitar. Dick learned the bass just to join him. The other members left one by one, but Tom and Dick kept going. They started telling jokes between songs to kill time. That was the real beginning of their style. They discovered that audiences laughed at their brotherly teasing as much as they liked the music. That sibling teasing became their trademark. On stage, Tom acted like the innocent one. Dick played the serious brother. They fought and argued in front of the crowd. Tom would say, "Mom always liked you best," and the audience would roar. It wasn't fake. It was just who they were. That real-life feeling gave their comedy an honesty that people could feel. By the mid-1960s, they had a chance to go even bigger. CBS was losing badly to NBC's Bonanza on Sunday nights. Bonanza was drawing a quarter of America's TV viewers. It had already crushed 2 other CBS hits, Perry Mason and The Gary Moore Show. CBS decided they had to try something bold. They wanted to draw in a younger crowd. They hoped the Smothers Brothers could do it. Tom and Dick were funny, smart, and different. CBS hoped they could help the network look cool again. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour premiered on February 5, 1967. On the surface, it looked like a normal variety show. Ed Sullivan introduced them as typical American kids. But within a few episodes, everyone could see they weren't typical at all. They joked about the Vietnam War. They mocked politicians. They talked about real issues. Their comedy was sharp and brave. Every week, they pushed boundaries. And people loved it. Within 2 weeks, they beat Bonanza in the ratings. Younger viewers tuned in. Advertisers were thrilled. Tom had asked for total creative control before they started. CBS agreed because they were desperate for a hit. That deal gave the brothers the freedom to say what they wanted. They invited folk singers like Pete Seeger, who sang anti-war songs. They made fun of President Johnson on national TV. Every show felt like a surprise. Every show felt like a risk. CBS censors fought them at every turn. The brothers fought back, often making the censorship part of the show. The writing team was as daring as the hosts. Young comedy writers like Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, Lorne Michaels, and David Steinberg all got their start there. They wrote jokes that mattered. They broke the usual TV rules. Many went on to change American comedy forever. Their work shaped shows like Saturday Night Live, All in the Family, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. In 1968, something happened on American television that nobody expected. On October 6th, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour showed the Beatles' promotional film for Hey Jude. Just a few weeks before that, on September 8th, people in the UK had already seen it. But this was the first time Americans could watch this kind of film. Back then, they weren't called music videos. They were called promotional films. The Beatles had shot Hey Jude at Twickenham Studios on September 4th. Paul McCartney even designed the set himself. A big orchestra, dressed in white tuxedos, played along. There were also 300 extras who sang the ending together. Ringo Starr had just come back to the band after quitting for a short time. So this was more than just a song. It was a big moment for them. That wasn't all. The next week, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour showed Revolution. 2 Beatles videos, back-to-back, gave American audiences a new way to experience the band. Other shows, even The Ed Sullivan Show, couldn't do this. The Smothers Brothers had access nobody else had. It felt like a big shift. Music was changing. Television was changing too. In 1967, another big moment happened on the same show. Pete Seeger was invited to sing. For years, Seeger had been banned from TV. The blacklist had kept him off the air for nearly 17 years. When he finally sang "Waist Deep in the Big Muddy," it was a direct jab at President Johnson's Vietnam policy. CBS cut the song before it aired in September 1967. Tom Smothers wasn't going to stay quiet. He made sure the story reached the press. Public anger forced CBS to let Seeger come back. On February 25, 1968, millions of people finally saw him sing the song, uncensored. This was the first time a blacklisted artist had called out a president so clearly. It was a powerful moment, showing that protest music could break barriers. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour also gave a stage to bands nobody else would touch. From 1967 to 1969, The Who, The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, Buffalo Springfield, and Steppenwolf all performed. These weren't safe choices for mainstream TV. The Who ended one performance by smashing their instruments and setting off explosives in Keith Moon's drum kit. The noise damaged Pete Townshend's hearing and sent shrapnel flying. The Doors performed Touch Me with a full orchestra. Jefferson Airplane sang Crown of Creation, a song about the fear of nuclear war. Buffalo Springfield played For What It's Worth, and Steppenwolf's Born to Be Wild brought raw energy into American homes. The Smothers Brothers didn't care if it scared the network. They wanted to give these rebellious voices a place to speak. That spirit was appreciated by some of rock's biggest names. On April 26, 1969, at the Los Angeles Forum, Jimi Hendrix paused before a song and dedicated his show to the Smothers Brothers. He called them heroes for allowing art and protest to live together on TV. Hendrix was at the top of his career. The show had just been canceled by CBS for being too controversial. But Hendrix didn't forget. On that stage, he told everyone that the Smothers Brothers mattered. Music and comedy had never blended so perfectly. And they did it with humor, too. A perfect example was a recurring bit called Share a Little Tea with Goldie. Lee French played Goldie O'Keefe, a spaced-out hippie who gave funny advice loaded with double meanings. Tea was code for weed. Goldie's name was originally Goldie Keefe, a slang word for cannabis. The censors made them change it, but most people watching at home knew exactly what was going on. Goldie talked about roaches, and nobody thought she meant bugs. Younger viewers loved the joke because it felt like the show was winking at them. Even though the network kept an eye on things, Goldie became a cult favorite. Keith Moon was never one to hold back. On September 17, 1967, when The Who took the stage on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, he decided to go even further than usual. The band was there to play My Generation, and Moon had something up his sleeve. He had secretly filled his kick drum with explosives. It was way more than anyone had agreed to. Even his bandmates had no clue what was about to happen. Moon wanted the perfect finale, loud, unforgettable, and wild. When the last part of the song hit, the explosives went off with a deafening blast. Smoke and debris shot across the stage. A piece of a cymbal hit Moon, knocking him backward. Pete Townshend's hair was blown up in a big mess. The force was so strong it caused hearing damage that would last for the rest of Townshend's life. The noise was so loud that it shocked the crowd into silence before they started to scream and cheer. Moon had created chaos and spectacle, exactly as planned. But the price was serious. Townshend would lose nearly 90% of his hearing in one ear. The ringing that followed was painful and never really stopped. Years later, Townshend still spoke about the constant pain and how playing guitar became harder because of the damage. It was an unforgettable moment for everyone, and one that changed the way they performed forever. And then came the guitar. Amid the smoke and confusion, Townshend grabbed Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar and smashed it on stage. Smothers just stared at him, too shocked to say anything. It felt like a perfect end to the chaos, a loud, rebellious moment that showed exactly who the Who were. They were pushing boundaries no one had dared to touch before. That explosion and the smashed guitar did more than make headlines. It became a part of rock history. Younger fans loved it. Older people were outraged. The show had given America something raw, rebellious, and real. Parents hated it, and kids thought it was freedom. It was a true generational split. And it was exactly what The Who, the Smothers Brothers, and their rebellious crowd wanted. The performance would never be forgotten. Joan Baez was also stirring things up. She was a folk singer who fought for peace and social justice, and everyone knew it. Born on January 9, 1941, in Staten Island, New York, she'd spent her life standing up for causes she believed in. By 1967, Baez had already been arrested for protesting, and her songs spoke to people who wanted change. When she appeared on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, she wanted to dedicate a song to her husband, David Harris, who was going to jail for 3 years. He had refused the draft and spoke out against the Vietnam War. Baez was proud of him and said so on the show, but CBS cut most of what she said, leaving only a vague message before she began to sing. Baez's censored dedication was one of many signs that CBS was under pressure. The network was scared of upsetting the government and angry sponsors. Even President Lyndon B. Johnson himself had complained about the show. Johnson had stayed up until 3 a.m. to call CBS and demand they control the Smothers Brothers. Nixon followed, pushing even harder to get them off the air. In 1968, the show had booked Harry Belafonte. They put together a powerful performance. Belafonte sang, "Lord, Don't Stop the Carnival," while footage showed police beating anti-war protesters at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It was bold, it was real, but CBS pulled the whole segment before it ever aired, and that wasn't the end of it. CBS then sold the 5 minutes they'd cut to the Republican Party for campaign ads. What was supposed to be a heartfelt protest against political violence turned into an ad buy for the very politicians being protested. It was clear which side the network was on. By late 1968, the Smothers Brothers were under intense pressure. CBS had decided that every script, joke, song lyric, and even full videotapes had to be sent in for review long before airing. It wasn't just a quick check. Censors would pick apart every single word. They hunted for anything political, anything about the Vietnam War, religion, or even harmless jokes. Every tiny detail had to pass their strict standards. Guest stars with an edgier sense of humor were often censored too, and some were cut completely. The deadline was set 10 days before each show. That was a harsh demand at the time, meant to rein in the brothers' habit of pushing limits. The writers felt trapped in an endless cycle of rewriting, resubmitting, and waiting. CBS often demanded changes at the very last minute, even hours before going live. The writers would joke that it felt like death by 1,000 cuts, and they weren't wrong. One day, Tom and Dick decided to fight back. They created a sketch where Tom played a censor himself, chopping up scripts with huge scissors and cutting performers off mid-sentence. The joke was clear. Their show was being silenced. The punchline was bold. The only thing left on screen was total silence. But CBS didn't see the humor. The network refused to air the sketch. Internal memos revealed that CBS thought the skit was too damaging to their image. Elaine May appeared in a similar sketch that also got pulled. Her final line, "If we're not allowed to say anything important, we're just fooling you with empty jokes," cut deep. Tom was furious. The censorship was now so extreme that even making fun of censorship was banned. Meanwhile, the brothers weren't giving up. They decided to play a game with CBS over deadlines. They would deliver tapes as late as possible. Sometimes they sent a safe version for review, then slipped in last-minute edits before going on air. It drove CBS crazy. The network accused them of breaking their contract. In April 1969, CBS finally decided enough was enough. They claimed the Smothers Brothers had failed to submit a tape on time, even though evidence showed CBS was partly to blame for delays. It was all an excuse to cancel the show, which was still one of the top 10 most-watched programs in the U.S. The real fight wasn't about deadlines at all. It was about control. Tom Smothers would later say it was all part of a plan to choke off their voice. The fight spilled into the press. The New York Times published a harsh editorial saying CBS was turning the Smothers Brothers into hostages of their own creativity. Public support grew. Letters and protests flooded CBS. Politicians and fellow artists spoke out. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one show. It was about free speech on national television. The editorial scared CBS executives. They rushed into damage control meetings. The Smothers Brothers stood their ground, determined to speak their truth. Tom put it simply, "They're not just shutting down our show, they're trying to shut down the truth." That stand became a turning point in television history. But CBS had other problems too. Big sponsors like Ford and Procter & Gamble started pulling their ads. Companies feared alienating their customers over the show's anti-war and political jokes. The losses piled up fast. Within months, CBS had lost millions. Internal memos showed that sponsor pressure was one of the biggest reasons behind the cancellation. Even a top-rated show could be sacrificed if advertisers were scared off. Tom later reflected bitterly, "We won the lawsuit, but we lost the culture war." Advertisers had sent a message, "Speak too freely, and you'd pay the price." There was one joke that crossed a final line. Dick did an impression of President Nixon in March 1969 and quipped, "I will end the Vietnam War as soon as I can find where the off button is." It was short, it was sharp, and it was true. But it enraged CBS and scared sponsors. The Vietnam War was a raw nerve, and so was the new president. The network was already tense, and this pushed them to the edge. On April 4, 1969, CBS pulled the plug. The cancellation was immediate. CBS claimed they had failed to submit tapes on time. But everyone knew it was really about their politics. The show was set to return for another season. The brothers had been renewed just weeks before. CBS even pulled an episode already taped, one that featured comedian David Steinberg delivering another anti-war message. The episode was never shown in America. It was broadcast in Canada instead. The cancellation was brutal and abrupt. It told every other performer that stepping too far out of line had serious consequences. The Smothers Brothers fought back in court. They sued CBS for breach of contract and spent 4 years battling. In April 1973, they won. The judge awarded them $776,300, over $5.5 million in today's money. The ruling was historic. It set a precedent that networks couldn't use censorship as a smokescreen for cancellation. But the win was bittersweet. They had already lost their platform. Future projects never quite matched the magic of their comedy hour. A tamer show they later did on NBC failed to catch on. CBS wasted no time in finding a replacement. On June 15, 1969, they premiered Hee Haw, a wholesome rural comedy show full of country songs and corny jokes. There was no satire, no politics, and no controversy. It was exactly what CBS wanted. It ran for 23 seasons. Its success proved that networks would choose safe entertainment over risk every time. The fight left its mark on Tom and Dick, too. Tom took it the hardest. He admitted years later that losing the show left him empty. It shattered his confidence and took a long time to heal. Dick turned to other interests like car racing and winemaking just to cope. Both brothers were changed forever. The scars stayed with them. A year after CBS fired them in 1969, the Smothers Brothers tried again. This time, they took their comedy to ABC. It was summer 1970, and the mood had changed. ABC was cautious. The network did not want any trouble like CBS had faced. They kept a close watch on the brothers and told them to tone things down. Audiences weren't as interested in rebellious humor anymore. The Vietnam War was winding down, and people had moved on. The show didn't last. Ratings dropped, and ABC decided not to give them a fall slot. This short run showed just how fast public taste can change. 1 year, they were cutting edge. The next, they were already behind. By January 1975, they tried again, this time on NBC. The first episode was huge. It was the 5th most watched show in America with a 50 share. That kind of number is impossible now, but their success didn't last. Behind the scenes, there was tension. The producer, Joe Hamilton, clashed with Tom and Dick. Tom wasn't even allowed to do retakes without losing part of his pay. They weren't allowed to meet with writers or talk to the press freely. The ratings soon fell, and the show slid to the bottom. Hamilton left in frustration. NBC finally gave Tom control for the last 4 episodes. That was when they did some of their most daring work. Like a joke about cocaine, a rare thing for prime time back then. And big guests like Ringo Starr and George Carlin. Even with these bright spots, NBC canceled the show halfway through the season. It was a reminder that networks could destroy even a promising comeback. In 1988, something surprising happened. Almost 20 years after CBS had fired them, CBS invited the Smothers Brothers back for a 1-hour reunion special. They even called it the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, the 20th reunion. The special was nominated for 3 Primetime Emmys. Writers like Steve Martin and Bob Einstein returned too. It was a nostalgic, gentle show. It did well enough in the ratings, but it felt very safe. The old political energy was gone. Audiences and critics liked seeing them again, yet it was not revolutionary anymore. That same year, CBS brought them back for a full revival of their show. The timing was strange. The Writers Guild was on strike. Without writers, the brothers relied on their old routines. Guests did most of the comedy. When the strike ended, they had new scripts again. Ratings went up a bit. The show even earned 5 Emmy nominations, but television had moved on. The revival lasted 2 seasons, from March 1988 to August 1989. It never had the impact the original did. The brothers' story was preserved forever in the fall of 2022. UC Santa Barbara's Performing Arts Collection accepted their entire archive. It included contracts, legal papers, photos, music sheets, and recordings. David Subert, the curator, said it deserved a place alongside the Library of Congress. This collection shows their fight for free speech and their influence on comedy. Even decades later, their work is still studied. It proves comedy can challenge power and speak up for real change. That was the Smothers Brothers' true legacy. Before Saturday Night Live even existed, they were already pushing boundaries. Their show ran from 1967 to 1969. It made jokes about war, censorship, and politicians. Writers like Lorne Michaels, who would create SNL, learned from them. Later, comedians like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, and Samantha Bee followed that path. The Smothers Brothers showed comedy could speak truth to power and make people think. The show was also a launchpad for comedy giants. Steve Martin was one of the first writers. Rob Reiner and George Carlin were regulars too. Many of them said later they owed their start to this show. The brothers had created a safe place to take risks. That gave American humor a sharp new edge that lasted for decades. When CBS canceled them in 1969, they fought back. Even though their show was one of the highest rated, CBS pulled the plug because of censorship. The brothers took them to court. They won. It was a landmark case for free speech on TV. For the first time, a comedy show had successfully fought back against a network. It set a precedent that creative freedom matters. And they did all this at a moment when America was split over Vietnam, civil rights, and culture itself. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was a bridge. They invited guests like The Who, Jefferson Airplane, and Simon and Garfunkel. Even folk singer Pete Seeger, who had been banned for his anti-war song. And they showed new videos like the Beatles' Hey Jude. For many people, this was their first exposure to the counterculture. Bill Maher once summed it up perfectly. The brothers weren't afraid to upset people who disagreed with them. They weren't trying to please everyone. They showed that comedy could take a stand, and that it could matter. Even after the show was canceled, that lesson stayed. And it still matters today.